Good afternoon or morning, wherever you are in the world. I wanted to talk about biotoxins today, and I don't want to get into too much complexity because it can be infinitely complex. But what I want to talk about is why biotoxins are relevant, because we've been talking about mold and the effects of mold and how mold affects different people depending on their genetics, how long they're exposed for, the different types of mold they're exposed for, right? And so, what I want to talk to you about is biotoxins, because those that become really susceptible to mold and have issues with mold also have many other factors that trigger their problems as well. So, many people that have been exposed to mold, even though they move out of mold or have the place remedied, they find that they have issues and they kind of get progressive. So one person I was speaking to yesterday talked about being diagnosed with POTS. Another person I spoke to had a stroke post after doing some ridiculous detox program and other things along those lines. So what I want people to understand is that mold might be the initial trigger, and you think by leaving it that you'll be okay. And some people are, because some people are just immunologically sensitized, and then by removing themselves, a majority of the symptoms, if not all, go away. Then you have this subset of people that are probably already compromised in some way, and that could look like a chronic fatigue or a fibromyalgia or a chronic Lyme case, or autoimmune like I had. And these things generally push your genetics harder, and then what it does, it triggers this chronic inflammatory response over a long period of time. And so I'm going to save you all the biochemistry lesson, but the problem is with biotoxins is that in a healthy person, you get exposed to these biotoxins, and most people think it's just from mold or water damaged buildings, but actually it could be from contaminated water, it could be from contaminated fish that you eat, right? It could be from other volatile compounds, for instance. And so what happens, a natural process of this with biotoxins, is they come into your body, they're generally bound up to things, and then they're removed, right? There's lots more steps to that, but that's the simplicity of it. So what can happen is your immune system can tag those things, make sure they're dealt with, then they're removed. What happens in someone who's susceptible, maybe their immune system is already compromised, is that these biotoxins don't get tagged by the immune system properly. And so they, instead of being cleared, they go from cell to cell, causing disruption. That's why very often when we see mold illness, or we see biotoxin illness, as some people would call it, we see multi-system issues. So that's why you see people with joints, brain fog, neurological issues, sleep issues, insomnia issues, skin issues, and it doesn't look like any of them connect, right? But the problem is with biotoxins is that you basically, if you have an immune system that can't tag these, they basically are stealth. They don't spend much time in the bloodstream. They go from cell to cell, causing disruptive processes. And then processes will impact how cells function, and depending where that cell is in the body, will develop a set of symptoms that go along with it, okay? So many people, will take binders that work in the gut or these kind of things, but what they don't realize is that they're being exposed not to just the biotoxins that come as a side effect of mycotoxins or spores, right? But they've also now got imbalanced microbiome, okay? So your gut. And so when you have an imbalanced microbiome, you will produce gram-negative bacteria, LPS, lipopolysaccharides, and they will produce waste product, which are able to trigger the immune system if they get into your bloodstream, for instance. So even though, what I'm trying to say here is, even though you get exposed to these initial biotoxins over here, whether it's through mycotoxins or whatever it might be, a water damaged building, because of how that affects the rest of the systems of the body, it becomes a downstream effect. So then it starts imbalancing the microbiome, for instance. Then you become like you have issues with volatile organic compounds, for instance. And so then that's where you start having issues with chemicals, smells of chemicals or paints or fuels, petroleum, these kind of things. And so what's really important to understand about this is that we're seeing a lot of things where mold and certain bacterias have a similar path and mechanisms in the body. So although mold might have been the first exposure that causes you an issue in the immune activation and the susceptibility of certain genes like HLA, like we spoke about, actually what we see is that gives permission for the immune system to get overactive and cause hyper-responsive issues in the body. And that is like having your foot on the gas in the car just constantly, right? Without there being any room to breathe, to brake, essentially. So what I want people to really understand when you're talking about biotoxins is that you're talking about it from multiple faceted approach in order to calm down the cellular response. And so what do you do about this? And so for me, the key thing about this is understanding at a cell level what is going on, because it's very easy to give someone, turmeric or curcumin or, any of these things that are seen to block the inflammatory cascade at a cell level, but that will not solve an issue, and it didn't for me, right? That's one thing I really want to get across, is that I was taking all of the anti-inflammatories and it would take the edge off and I'd feel okay, but I never felt clear, I never felt sharp, I never felt like I could breathe, if that makes sense. And what I realized is that, biotoxins were getting into my brain and all sorts of things. And what I wasn't aware of was the multitude of different areas that I could be exposed. So one thing we have to work out is where are you being exposed? Is it your current environment, or is it from other things? Poor water sources or other different issues, or is it coming from the microbiome, LPS, these kind of issues? And then what is it doing at a cell level? And that's where we start talking about and understanding, okay, well, what's going on in your mitochondria? So your mitochondria are your batteries. That's the easiest way, and they run on lots of different things, and we need adequate levels of copper, we need adequate levels of iron, we need adequate levels of all these different minerals, and we need good balance. But when the acute inflammatory response is really going, then what's going to happen is you're going to find that it's very difficult to balance these things. So what I would say for most people when it comes to endotoxins, most people run to aggressive clearance protocols, they run to aggressive binding protocols. But what I found in my experience with people is that what really happens, if you try and move too quickly, you'll make this person feel much worse, and you have a chance of really breaking down their system, right? And they can end up really, really sick. I've just got one gentleman from the US at the moment who was put on a very aggressive protocol, and it's made him much, much worse. And so as I explain with people, you have to get the system moving first, and we have to work out what that is for you, right? That might be you need to sweat, or you need to go from very sedentary to some form of movement to get your lymphatic system moving. Because if you start using binders and you start using these aggressive therapies without having the ability for the body to back you up, essentially, then you're really going to struggle. So I wanted to make this video just to make you aware that biotoxins are a very real thing. Biotoxin illness is a very real thing, and they come from multiple different things. So obviously we've talked about mold, and obviously certain molds produce mycotoxins, and that becomes a massive issue because they are the things that are very poisonous in mold, for instance. But then you have endotoxins and you have bacterial gram-negative toxins, which can mimic these very similar responses at an immune level, at a cell level. So I hope that was useful for you. If you would like to learn more about this subject, I'm going to cover it all in the Mold Fix Masterclass. We're going to go in detail into all of these things, where to recognize yourself within these stages of biotoxin exposure or illness, whether you are acute or chronic, whether it is your home environment or whether it's past environments, and just this chronic inflammatory response that's happening. And to just give it perspective before I wrap up, this is very similar to what we're seeing in like long COVID, for instance. We're actually seeing a very similar immunological response constantly, the same as what we're seeing with endotoxins and biotoxins as well. So hopefully that was useful. If you would like more details, please just let me know. You can contact me via email or social media, whatever's best, and I'll speak to you soon.